many people said capitalism was immoral. But Marx was the first to say that capitalism was irrational. And he pointed to the key problems with capitalism. And we're going to talk about those key problems. First one would be production for profit not social use, or not use. In New York City, you have a lot of restaurants in New York City. In New York City, we also have a lot of homeless people. And it's very common that in restaurants in New York City, at the end of the night, they have leftover food, and they'll take it to the dumpster, and before they just leave it there in the dumpster, they'll pour motor oil all over it. And why is that? That's so no homeless person can take it out of the garbage. And why would they do that? Well, if a homeless person gets that food out of the garbage, then they wouldn't buy it from the restaurant, because they didn't make that food so people could eat it. They made that food so they could make profits from it. That's production for profit, not for social use. And I went to the movies, and I wanted to drink some unnamed diet beverage at the movies. So I walked into the movie theater. I had bought my ticket, and before I went up to the counter, before the movie started, and I said I would like a soda. And they said, that'll be $5.50. And I said, $5.50 for a soda? And you know, they had already filled it up, and they put the ice in it. I said, well, I don't have $5.50. They said, oh, okay. And they poured it out, and they threw the cup away. Now, why did they do that, right? They still lost the same thing. Again, they didn't make that cup of soda for me to drink it. They made that cup of soda so they could make profits. That's capitalism, right? Capitalism is production for profit, not social use. When he was in Union Square in New York City, and he found all kinds of coats in the middle of the winter, freezing cold, that were being thrown into the dumpsters near Union Square in New York City. But before they were thrown into the dumpsters, the store owners near there had taken blades and cut them up. Why? Because they didn't make those coats so that people could wear them and keep warm. They made those coats so that they could make a profit. And so to make sure no homeless person would take these coats out of the garbage, they had taken knives and cut up these coats that they threw away. And the video that Dakota made illustrating this point, it went viral, it went everywhere. People saw this. This is the irrational capitalist system. And Marx was the first to point to the irrationality of capitalism, not simply the immorality of inequality. So you have the general law of capitalist accumulation. And this is something that every capitalist is very well aware of, though a lot of working people are not, which is that if a capitalist enterprise is not expanding, it dies. The way the capitalist works is he invests, right? He hires workers to make products. They then sell those products. He makes profits from those products. And then he takes his profits and he reinvests them to make more profits. And then he reinvests them to make more profits. And at any point, a capitalist enterprise stops expanding, it dies. And so what is the result of that? That gradually some businesses go out of business and other businesses expand. And as this happens, you generally get a centralization of wealth in the hands of a few. If a capitalist enterprise is not expanding, it dies. But when you get to the point that one corporation or one business is dominant, then growth stops. And you get what's called monopolistic stagnation. Because at that point, when there are no competitors, there's no motivation for it to expand. So you have this frequent problem of capital centralizing and centralizing and centralizing as the capitalist is investing profits to make more profits, to make more profits, to make more profits. And eventually you get a situation where there's a monopoly, and then production comes to a grinding halt. And so the government has to step in and break up the monopolies. And the capitalists, it's so wild. There's all these claims that the problems with capitalism are because of the government. But there are all kinds of mechanisms invented by the capitalists and by the government to prevent reaching a state of monopolistic stagnation in order to keep accumulation going. For example, it is illegal, you may notice, there is a very wealthy business owner in China. He owns AMC movie theaters. And he was going to buy one of the Hollywood studios. And the U.S. government said, no, you cannot do that because it is illegal to own a movie studio in Hollywood and to own a movie theater. And why is that? Because of the general law of capitalist accumulation. Because if a movie theater and a movie studio were owned by the same company, then they would only show their movies in the movie theater. And as a result of that, pretty soon you'd have a monopoly. There are other laws like this that prevent monopolistic stagnation. In order to keep capitalism in a state of constant expansion, you have to break up monopolies because the tendency is for the centralization of wealth in the hands of the few. So the capitalist hires the worker, to work in his factory and sell the products. But the worker is never paid enough to buy back the products that he produces, right? And in fact, you want to write, so let's start out, you've got A, which is the materials to make the product, A. It's like a math problem, like A. Oh, yeah, all good. A, so A, right, plus B, which is the shipping of the product. Okay. Right, plus C, which is the labor costs. Right, and then D, which is the price. Now, there's a little bit of a problem here. So if A plus B plus C equals D, how does the capitalist make a profit? The only way the capitalist can make a profit is by cutting into C. So you have C1, the labor costs, and C2, which is the capitalist profit, so the surplus value. And that's why Marxism maintains workers are exploited, because they're not getting the full value of their labor. In order for the worker to get the full value of their labor, there could be no profit for the capitalist. The capitalist profits are C2. The total price of the product is D, and C1 is what the worker gets paid. C1 can never equal D. Can you write C1 does not equal D? There's no way that the worker can be paid enough to buy back the product he produces. There will always be more products than there are consumers. The worker is also the consumer, and the worker can never buy back the product he produces. And this is the problem of overproduction. And capitalist production cannot overcome this problem, right? And so the capitalist is constantly looking for ways to deal with this. And generally, the boom-bust cycle that we've heard about is rooted in this problem. Pretty soon the market is glutted with products that cannot be sold. And this is due to the problem of overproduction. However, that brings us to point number 4. Point number 4 is the tendency for the falling rate of profit. So the capitalist wants to maximize C2, his profits. In order to do that, he wants to cut in and pay as little as he can for C1, the labor, right? The less labor that he pays for, the more his profits increase. But the capitalist cannot cut in to the shipping costs. He cannot cut in to the costs of the materials for the product. He can only advance his rate of profit. He can only advance his profits by cutting into the labor, right? By paying less for the worker. And that's why we hear all about, how they de-skill jobs, for example. How many short order cooks are there nowadays? Not many, right? You go to McDonald's, making food is almost like an assembly line, practically, because they want to make the workers easily replaceable so they can pay them less. You talk about machines replacing labor. That's all about this, about maximizing the profits. But the problem is that as you reduce the role of labor in production, right, as the value of C becomes less, the rate of profit overall decreases, because he can only make profit by cutting into C. And if C becomes less and less, you have the falling rate of profits. So as the capitalist system functions, we have seen historically that the greatest economic crises come in the aftermath of big technological leaps. The problem of overproduction and the problem of the tendency for the falling rate of profits becomes exacerbated when there is a big technological leap. And World War I came after great technological innovations. World War II came after great technological innovations. And the reason that we're in the situation that we're in right now around the world, with so much unrest and so much hunger and so much suffering, is because we are living in the aftermath of probably the greatest technological leap that we've ever seen. 3D printers, for example. You talk about these books. They have print on demand. When you push a button and a book comes out. There used to be thousands of people who worked in book binderies, just binding books all day. It used to be in order to print a book, you had to print 5,000 copies of it, or it just wasn't cost effective. But now, one book can be printed by pushing a button. This is one of the greatest technological leaps we've ever seen, and as a result, it's creating a prolonged economic crisis. And that's the situation that we are in the 21st century. Now, what's the solution to this? What's the solution to this problem? Well, Karl Marx advocated that the working class, the proletariat, those who sell their labor to survive, those with nothing to lose but their chains, in order to resolve these problems, that they, on behalf of all of society, rise up and take control of the means of production. And the banks, factories, and industries, and the major centers of economic power should be forced to work for the good of all and not simply for the profits of their owners. That the means of production should be controlled by the people. And once you can get rid of this, you can erase that now because it's gone. Once you get rid of that, at that point, growth can no longer be interrupted. You can have uninterrupted economic growth because these problems are eliminated. With the ending of these problems and this stagnation of capitalism, you get the basis for the eventual emergence of the higher stage of communism, which is a post-scarcity society. The idea is with vast material abundance, inequality can fade away. When everyone has enough, who needs to hoard and have more than somebody else?